It's going to tell you real quick a little bit about Fruition Partners. So our cloud offerings range from, process to technology, and we provide solutions to address every phase of the ITSM lifecycle, from completely managed services to custom integrations. Fruition Partners really helps define, automate, educate, and extend IT services to the cloud. So today, Louis from our managed services team is going to do a little bit of a deep dive into, tips and tricks into keeping a healthy instance and keeping it running smoothly. Just so you know, this webinar will be recorded, and you will be notified when the recording is available. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Louis to get to all the good stuff. Thanks again for joining.
Hi, guys. My name is Louis. I am from Managed Services at Fruition Partners. With our department in Managed Services, we deal with a lot of different instances. A lot of people who have gone live, a lot of phase twos, people who have been live for a long time and are looking to improve their instance. And as we've kind of gone into all these different instances, there's a lot that we've seen that it may be something that's working, but it's something that's not necessarily done in the way that's best practice. So here we have a bunch of kind of tips and things. It'll start out a little high level, and we'll get a little deeper into some scripting things as we go along. But these are meant to kind of provide you with a healthier instance, fine-tune some things. Again, you may have scripts that are working, but they may easily error out, or they may cause conflicts in the future. So we're going to look at ways to try to avoid things like that. And then just some general kind of tips and rules that we've kind of come to live by at Managed Services. We'll also have time for questions at the end, so if you have any, feel free to type them in the questions box, and we'll get to answering those closer to the end. We will be doing these quarterly. Basically, this is kind of a high level, and we'll probably be getting a little deeper each quarter, or if we start to notice a certain trend within instances, we'll probably dive into those things as well. So what we're going to go over today are just kind of like some simple ways to keep your instance sleek. We'll talk about form and report loading, loading times, client scripts, UI policies, possibly indexing, things like that can help speed up your instance, your form loads, especially if you have older browsers. That's something that cleaning these things up can actually help you make those things go a little faster. And then we'll get a little bit into script efficiency. We'll do a few quick demos of some script tricks that you can use to prevent errors and to prevent things that might run a little slow. Cool. So we're going to start with form and report loading. So here are just some general rules on client scripts. We've noticed typically, and this just depends on the client scripts and the environment that they're in, but 30 is about the threshold of client scripts where you start to notice load time issues. And that's active client scripts, and that's on load and on change client scripts. If you filter your client script list, you can see that number, and then if that number is greater than 30, you may want to look into consolidating those scripts. There are a lot of things you can do in order to, if two scripts are basically doing similar things, you can basically maybe create an if-or statement or have both functions happen in the same script. It's definitely worth looking into that, because each of those scripts are being downloaded basically to the client's machine. So every time they load the form, they're going to have to pull in those client scripts. And also, if you have that many, you'll start to notice that one client script error can affect all of your subsequent client scripts. We'll kind of demo that in a little bit here. The fact that one little error basically can kind of snowball into a lot of things not working. So consolidating is one way to fix that. The other thing to look at are try catch logs, and we'll be demoing that a little bit later. Those are a really good way to catch errors and have them not affect the rest of your client scripts. So we'll go into that. That is one thing that when we see a lot of client scripts, and really a try-catch bracket would really help speed things up and actually prevent errors in the future. Same goes for UI policies. Usually 35 to 40 is active UI policies will affect load times. That is typically something we see a lot on change. Typically, if someone is utilizing risk assessment or something where they have people filling out a lot of things on the change form that calculate risk. There's usually a lot of hides and shows, a lot of mandatories, things that UI policies cover. And, typically change has, people are usually crawl, walking, and running with change. So they're constantly adding new UI policies. So over time, your list of UI policies is going to grow and grow and grow. And just like client scripts, because really a UI policy is more of a GUI front end to a client script, you'll notice that they start to affect each other more and more. So the best way to start thinking about this is actually rethinking how you structure your UI policies. We go into a lot of environments that have 40 or 50, 60 to 100 UI policies, and they get crazy. And someone will have one requirement that says, okay, this field needs to be hide or shown on this condition, and this field needs to be hide or shown on this condition. And because those two requirements came at different stages in the projects, they will conflict with each other. And you may not even notice it at first. It may be when someone's on the form and adjusting things. So what I'm going to show you is kind of a different way to think about UI policies. Instead of thinking about it from the condition level, it's more efficient to think of it in the action level. So here we have a typical change request, and I just kind of threw up a few fields here, these checkboxes that are kind of, standard kind of risk assessment fields. So I have these three fields, and if I go to personalize and UI policy, we have three different UI policies. Now, in a standard environment, over time, we would see these two, which would be risk questions with a state of open. Okay, and so when the state is open, it's going to show these, which means if it's not open, it's going to hide them. So you have our conditions here. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and set this to active. And so that's typically a type of UI policy that happens. But then somewhere down the line, maybe in phase 2, they also say, okay, well, we only want to show those on routine and comprehensive changes. So that UI policy will be created. Okay? So we go ahead and update that. Now, we have these two UI policies that are active. Now, in I think it's Berlin and later, they will actually, your UI actions are going to show up red, meaning that there's another UI policy that has an action on those. That's a new piece of functionality that's actually very, very useful in determining, if you might possibly have conflicts. So now if I go into change, you're going to see now that I've created these conflicting UI policies, you're going to see that it's open and it's comprehensive, but if we change it to routine, oh, yeah, if we change it to none here, they go away. But if we change this, they don't come back, even though it's not an open anymore. You see that, like, if you start clicking around, you'll start noticing strange behavior, and you can get to situations where the UI policies just aren't working right. So when you're going back through your when you're given a new requirement, it's better to take a look at the actual action, the fields that are being affected by the conditions. So here we have these two, but really we could cover them in just this one. So we have this UI policy that is risk questions hide or show, and instead of having two different UI policies, we have one UI policy just with different conditions. So if I go back here, and I'm going to go ahead and just deactivate these two. Oh, got some resolution issues here. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and deactivate these two, and I'm going to activate my my best practices one. Okay. Now we'll see that the behavior is a little bit more true to what we want. So it's actually going based on the condition. It's evaluating. It's comprehensive and open. If it goes to emergency, it goes away. If it goes to something other than open, it goes away. And you have fewer conflicts with these UI policies. So your best way to look at it is what is being affected by what. A good way as an administrator to go in, you've had your phase 1, maybe your phase 2 of change, is to go in once you've upgraded to Berlin or later and see which one of those actions are red. If you have a lot of conflicting, then what you want to do is put all those conflicting ones in the same UI policy and then just adjust the conditions based on, you can have ands, ors, and that way you'll have fewer. In this particular case, this was a very simplistic view of it, but in this case, you'll see that we had 2, and we were able to boil it down to 1. In previous implementations of this, we've actually been able to boil like 100 UI policies down to maybe 10 to 15. So just keep that in mind as a developer as you're going forward, to always consider your existing UI policies and have them more based on the actions than the conditions, because the conditions can be adjusted based on what the requirements are. Okay, so let me go back to my slides here. Okay, great. All right, so reporting. This is just some general rules that we've noticed. Dashboards, especially with reporting, can be a huge taxation on the system. We'll go into a lot of environments and they'll use 3 columns, and they'll use a lot of global reports, meaning not necessarily active, active data, but data, historical data and things like that. And when you start having, 10,000 incidents and you're reporting on all of them, a dashboard like this can, maybe take a couple minutes to load, and that actually is a taxation on your server. And we've seen that this can definitely cause some issues. So it's better to, number one, divide out your dashboards, obviously based on table maybe, things like that, to make sure you have fewer reports if you have to have global reports. It's also much better to have filters on those reports. That's going to really increase your loading time. Condition order is also a huge thing. Basically, what you want to do is make sure that when you're creating your report, if you have conditions, that your conditions are excluding the most records first, because what we want to do is limit it down and not have to requery any of the same data. So within these two, we have filter and order. Assignment group is hardware and active is true, and active is true and assignment group is hardware. So based on the amount of tickets, chances are you're going to want to order that based on what returns the most results. I'd say in this case, probably active is true first is going to eliminate the most amount of records, and then assignment group as hardware is going to eliminate the least. So this second one right here is going to be the most appropriate filter. So this one is most likely the one. Now, it's possible that you don't have as many active incidents, but my guess is that you probably do, and that if you just filter out your active incidents first and then filter by assignment group, then you'll notice that the time can go up by maybe 50%, because it's eliminating any requerying of data. And then the other thing that I've noticed actually really can improve not just reporting, it also improves other things, is indexing. So you would go to the Hi server and ask for certain fields to be indexed on your most queried tables. That being said, I would say, the most common ones would be like in CIs, your CI name, incident category, incident assignment group. If you index those fields and you have hundreds of thousands of records, you'll notice for each index that you create, 25% increase in the performance of your reports, and even any fields that search by that. So, for example, like the assignment group field, the reference field on incident, you'll notice that sometimes if you have more assignment groups, the query takes a little bit longer, and you'll type something in, and it takes a little bit longer for that those values to show up. But if you index it, you'll notice quite an increase in the speed of that. Okay. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about script efficiency. There's some things here that are maybe a little deeper than we really have time to show, but I definitely want to mention them. Some of them we will be able to demo, and we will be doing some deeper scripting webinars when we do another quarterly webinar in the future. We're starting from kind of a higher level here and getting deeper. But these are actually the most common in terms of scripting practices that you'll definitely want to keep your eye on, especially as an administrator, being able to go through your existing scripts and be able to see, oh, maybe I could do this a little bit better. Maybe I could make this query a little bit faster. Maybe I could avoid errors by putting in this particular piece of code. So I'll go through these. I do want to demo this one because I think this is probably the most underutilized function within client scripts is the try-catch. So a try-catch allows you to have an error within a client script without it breaking that client script, because what you would essentially do is you would put all the code that you have, and as a catch you would have your error. Now you'll notice there's an error within this, in that it should not be GS log. You can't use GS within client scripts, so just keep that in mind. It would be JS log. So when you try catch, essentially what you're doing is you're saying, okay, if this doesn't work, do this, and then you would use your catch. Let me kind of show you this, and then I'll go back through the benefits a little bit. This is something I'm pretty sure is working. Okay, so we have our UI policy, and I want to demonstrate something. Okay, so right now, everything seems to be working fine. Our UI policy seems to be working okay, things like that. But if we go in, and I created a bad client script that I actually called bad script. Second, sorry. I called this bad script, and what this is it's a script that is trying to grab the display value of a field that's not displayed. So therefore, it's gonna cause an issue. If I go ahead and click Update here, okay, so this bad script is there. If we go into any change, all right, we're going to notice that our client scripts are actually not working. Our UI policy isn't working anymore. A bad client script that executes before a UI policy or any other scripts is essentially going to kind of cause a snowball effect that will break your other UI policies and or client scripts. So an error in this particular case, it may be that we had the scope field on the change request, but then someone took it off maybe, or maybe it just doesn't exist in production. So that when we move our code, it causes this error. That's kind of a pain, because you might have a script that's referencing a field, it causes an error, and it breaks all your scripts, and then you have to dig through all your client scripts to find out where it went wrong. But if you start using try catch, and let me just show you this. So I'm going to turn off our bad script here. And then I'm going to show you the same bad script, but using try catch. So what this is going to do is it's going to, it's the same bad script, but I have a try. It's going to try it. If there's an error, it's going to catch it with that error, and it's going to put up a JS log. Okay, a JS log you can see through the debug console when you're that you can just go in through here and debug on your when you load the form. So I'm going to go ahead and set this as true. And now, if we go into our change, that script is still running, and it's still broken. But our UI policies are now working. And in fact, all of our other scripts are now working. That again is because it's saying, try this. If it doesn't work, if there's an error, do this. And I would go into the debug console, but there's a lot of information there. Typically, if you just click on debug and look at the bottom of the form, you would see your errors. It would actually show up below your related lists. All right. So again, there's some pretty good advantages to this. So you can issue a custom error message, and it would write to your JS log, which would then show up on your form. So you can actually see which script is causing it has an error. That's just really useful when debugging anything. And when you control error handling this way, execution of subsequent client scripts and UI policies will continue, which is huge. It's probably one of our #1 troubleshooting headaches is when someone says, okay, a bunch of our client scripts and UI policies aren't working. We typically, the first thing we have to start looking into is whether or not a client script is causing an error. And so this just allows you to avoid that altogether. This is another thing. I'm not going to actually do a demo of this because it would take a little bit longer, and we don't really have the time. But again, in the future, we definitely will go through a few more scripting demos. But when you're using a query on a client-side script, make sure to use a callback function. It will really increase your performance. Basically, what that does is in a regular query like this, usually people just do a query and then they do while next. This causes a pretty big, this does a large query of everything on the table. What you really want to do is have your query and then just do my callback function and then call the function from within that query, then have your while. What that does is allows you to basically kind of isolate that query, and it allows your client scripts to just run a lot faster. We've noticed quite a bit of a performance uptick when you start to use that. Also, this get reference, which I clicked on it. Let me go back here. Yeah. The G-form get reference call, which is really useful, but also can be pretty slow. If you use a callback function, if you just type my callback function, you can really utilize and use that to do your query. Again, it's just a much quicker way. You'll notice in your queries pretty much immediately. Again, this is something we can dive a little bit deeper to in the future, because it is something, I would say probably the try-catch is our number one, and the number one thing we wanted to make sure we went over. This is definitely something that can be helpful as well. So on business rules, the general rule should always be, if something doesn't need to happen visually on a form, meaning show or hide of a field based on conditions that are happening when the user is on the form, it should be a business rule instead of a client script. Something we go into a lot of environments are basically client scripts that are doing essentially what a business rule should be doing. So again, a client script, the user has to actually, the client script is is coming onto the person's machine, which means that it just increases load time. A business rule is server side, so therefore it will function a lot quicker. So just in general, a business rule, if you can use it, if something doesn't need to happen, like as someone is viewing the form, let's say like a set value based on a series of other values, then you definitely use a business rule. A big one would be like risk assessment. If you have a risk assessment, a lot of people want to fill out the risk immediately, but really the risk is more for the person working on the change, not the person submitting the change. So it's much better to have that in a business rule as opposed to a client script. Also, queries within business rules are a huge thing. I've noticed a lot of people who have queries within business rules that query an entire table and then have conditions later down in the script that say, okay, if it's active is true, things like that. Really, you want to add that to the query itself so that the query is more efficient. So let me show you some examples of that. Here we have a pretty bad example of a query within a business rule. What you have is basically a glide. We have parent incident is current sysid. That might be tons of incidents depending on what the record is. And then in this while loop, there's all these if statements that say if comments are 0, and current incident state is 6, and current active is true, and you have the same thing here. Essentially what this is doing is it's querying all of those incidents before it even gets to this part, but since these are the same, this is the least efficient way to do it because it's cycling through every single one of those incidents. A better example is to actually put that query inside the query. So we want to say, okay, we have our parent is the current sysid and the incident state is not equal to 6. And then this add active query basically is a system call that allows you to just pull active incidents. So by doing that, we can reduce these if statements, and basically it's querying, while it's cycling through fewer of those incidents. So that's kind of the the recommended way in business rules. It's something we see pretty often. Just a quick note on global business rules. We see a lot of people creating global business rules. Sometimes they don't put the global business rule within a function, or they have a condition in there. You really have to be careful with global business rules. They are active with everything in the system. First thing is you have to make sure it's in a function. If it's not in a function, it's going to run on every action. It can actually cause your instance to screech to a halt. You want to take your time to evaluate beyond the immediate requirements, meaning if you have to create a global business rule for any reason, you want to make sure that it's usable other places. If you're just creating a global business rule for incident, then just make it an incident business rule. A global business rule will affect everyone else. So you have to make sure that you kind of communicate with other developers within your system who may be working on other things to make sure that they know that this is happening. And then you want to make sure it's reused by other processes. It's not just for you; it's for other people. But it also, you want to make sure you script it in such a way that it can, if someone else does need to use it, that it's not just specific to one table or another. And then, actually, this is my preferred way of doing any of this kind of thing. If you have to do it, then consider using a script include. They're a little bit more advanced, but they are definitely way more efficient in terms of being able to call things from pretty much anywhere. Script includes are great because you can call them from pretty much any place within the system. So definitely consider using those. Again, script includes are a little more advanced, and we definitely would like to probably go over those at some point in time. And just go over what's the best practices with script includes, but that's just a whole other meeting. Cool. So just in short, I just wanted to kind of reiterate that these were kind of our high level high level things that we see on pretty much a daily basis, and I wanted to kind of throw these out there. We'll be doing these quarterly, so we'll be getting a little more advanced. Sometimes we'll be going into different areas, things like that. So keep an ear out. If this was helpful and you want to know more, those would definitely be useful to you. So now I'm going to kind of go over some questions that you guys might have asked. I don't see any questions. If you have anything, feel free to type it in the question box on anything we've talked about or anything else in general. Be happy to answer for you. I'll just kind of hold tight, see if you guys have anything to ask. Okay, so we had our scripts loaded for a particular page, or all scripts loaded on every page. That's a good question. So your client scripts, your client scripts and UI policies will only be loaded at the table that they're on. So, for example, incident, it's going to load the client scripts from incident and from task, because as you guys probably know from admin class, that everything's kind of extended from task. And if task had client scripts, they would load up. Now, task doesn't have a lot of client scripts, but let's say you had an incident task or a change task, for example. A change task would have the client scripts from change and change task. So always be aware of that it will be loading the scripts from the table it's extended from as well. Incident, that's not a big problem. Change and change task, that can cause issues. Sometimes you have to call out the fact that there might be a field on change that's not shown on change task, and you might need to filter out a certain client script based on the filter at the top. Good question. Any best practice recommendations for extended tables or custom applications built? Yeah, definitely. Number one, like I mentioned, you have to be aware of what scripts are on what tables, because again, if you extend a table from something else, then you definitely want to make sure that those particular client scripts or business rules or UI policies are applicable to the extended table. In terms of custom applications, you definitely want to find what is the closest to what you're trying to do and extend from that. I mean, if it's 100% custom, then task is probably fine, and there's not going to be any real client scripts, but you might notice a few business rules that come over. But let's say you wanted to do something off of the HR table for some reason, so we have an HR table, we want to do some other version of HR, we extend that table. You do have to be aware that that those client scripts, business rules, and UI policies will be active on that extended table. Would it be safe to assume that limitations on catalog client scripts and UI policies are the same 30/40? Yes, actually that's a very, very good point. Once you get into that level on any type of form, then you will notice a slowdown. It's the same kind of process. That's a very, very good question. I'm very new to ServiceNow and would like to know what learning path I should take to learn scripting. I'm completed the admin class. Actually, I think we can email you separately for that. There's definitely a scripting path and set of training courses that kind of start from a very basic level and then go up. I will take your information and send you information on that. Thank you. Cool. Well, I think that's about all for today. Thank you guys. Actually, hold on. Please send scripting classes info to me also. Great, will do. I know there's a way in ServiceNow to create a shortcut to build a predefined block of code. Where is that located in system preferences to build a block for try catch? I'll have to look into that. I'll email you specifically about that. I'm not necessarily sure what you mean by block of code. I mean, there are script includes. I'm not sure if that's what you mean or not. So I will get more information. Feel free. My email. I'll send out my email when we close this out. And if you guys have any other questions, we will take them. I'll do one more question because I think we have enough time. Are there any best practices RE UI scripts? Okay, so UI scripts and UI macros and things like that. There are a series of best practices. It's a whole other meeting for that. But we definitely are planning on doing kind of a UI set of webinars in the future that might actually require multiple. So definitely, as that comes out, we'll definitely send you information on that. Okay, guys. Well, if there's any other questions, feel free to email them to me. And yeah, thank you guys very much. I hope this was informational. If you have any feedback, please contact myself or Christina. And thank you guys very much.